Hey everyone, welcome back to Malaysia in Focus, where we take deep dives into the social, political, and economic stories shaping our country today. Because what you're about to learn reveals exactly how creative accounting hid a multi-billion ringgit deficit that nearly collapsed one of our most trusted national institutions. For years, there were whispers, right? A lot of online confusion about what was actually happening inside Lembaga Tabung Haji. Now, this isn't just any regular fund. It literally holds the sacred savings of over 9 million Malaysians entrusted to help them perform the Hajj. But what this newly declassified Royal Commission of Inquiry report uncovers about the years 2014 to 2020, well, it's a story of a deep systemic crisis. So, here's what we're looking at today. First, we'll unpack the RN 4.8 billion illusion. Then, we'll figure out where exactly that money went. Third, we'll look at the massive 2018 rescue mission, before fast-forwarding to the 2026 debt settlement. And finally, we'll talk about securing the fund's future. Grab a coffee or your virtual teh tarik, and let's make sense of this together.
All right, part 1, the RM 4.8 billion illusion and unmasking the 2017 financials. To really grasp how heavy this is, we have to look back at that 2014 to 2020 period. The RCI actually found that the leadership at the time ignored explicit warnings from financial regulators like Bank Negara Malaysia, and instead leaned into some seriously aggressive creative accounting. In 2017, Tabung Haji officially reported a net profit of RM 3.4 billion. Sounds fantastic, right? It allowed them to pay out high dividends, or hiba, to their depositors. But when the RCI went back and reconstructed the books using proper, standard accounting rules, the reality was actually pretty shocking. They didn't make a profit at all. They suffered a massive net loss of RM 1.4 billion. So how do you hide a loss that big? Well, they used a trick called realizable asset value substitution. Basically, they just invented subjective, highly inflated values for their struggling assets, instead of recording what they were actually worth on the market. On top of that, they recorded phantom dividends from their own subsidiaries, literally writing down money those companies didn't even have the cash to pay.
And that whole maneuver leaves us with a staggering RM 4.8 billion deficit. Now, here's the catch. By law, under the Tabung Haji Act, you absolutely cannot pay dividends if your liabilities exceed your assets. It's illegal. But they paid it anyway. To put it into perspective, paying dividends out of your principal capital is like scooping rice from the very bottom of a totally empty pot to serve your guests, all while pretending the pot is overflowing. You are literally eating into the depositor's own hard-earned savings. And maybe the wildest part, while operating in this severe financial deficit, staff were still being paid performance bonuses, ranging from 2 all the way up to 13 months' salary.
If this breakdown is already giving you a much clearer picture of what went down, hit that like and subscribe button right now, so you'll always stay one step ahead on Malaysia's biggest issues. Moving on to Section 2. Where did all that money actually go? Let's look at the 14 troubled investments. You might be wondering, how do you even dig a hole this deep? Well, the RCI identified 14 highly troubled investments that were severely plagued by poor due diligence. Take FGV Holdings, for example. Tabung Haji bought heavily into their IPO, and when the share price started falling, instead of cutting their losses, they actually bought more. They were eventually left with over $1 billion in unrealized losses just from that single stock. Then you have True Rich Resources over in Indonesia. The RCI alleges that internal reports were manipulated to buy totally unsuitable plantation land, which ended up costing hundreds of millions of ringgit. It's the exact same story with TH Marine in the offshore oil and gas sector. Over $270 million was wiped out simply because they completely lacked proper downside protection on the investment. So why were such glaringly bad commercial decisions being made in the first place? The RCI points the finger directly at political interference. It's a tale as old as time. When active politicians sit on corporate financial boards, commercial logic and fiduciary duty usually take a backseat to political interests. Now, to be completely fair to all sides here, the former chairman, Datuk Seri Abdul Aziz, defended his tenure. He noted that he couldn't approve investments all by himself, and he rightfully pointed out that the MACC cleared him of personal embezzlement. But structurally speaking, the RCI found that politics absolutely drove the core decisions. A huge prime example of this is the Hajj subsidy. The real actual cost to send a pilgrim to Mecca had shot up to over 25,000 ringgit. But for political reasons, the fee charged to pilgrims was artificially capped. That decision alone ballooned the fund's subsidy burden to $300 million every single year, actively draining cash that was supposed to be meant for your savings.
That brings us to Section 3, the 2018 rescue mission, or what we can call emergency corporate surgery.
By late 2018, independent audits finally exposed a horrifying RM11 billion gap in the balance sheet. Now, this wasn't just a corporate problem. This was a national emergency. Why? Because the government legally guarantees Tabung Haji's deposits. If the fund collapsed, it would threaten the fiscal stability of the entire country. So the government had to step in and perform emergency corporate surgery. Think of Tabung Haji like a bucket full of holes. To fix it, the government created a specialized repair shop, a special-purpose vehicle called Urus Haja Jamaah, or UJSB. The process was done in 3 steps. Step 1, transfer all those leaky, underperforming toxic assets out of Tabung Haji and directly into UJSB. Step 2, UJSB issues billions in Islamic bonds, known as sukuk, to essentially pay for them. And step 3, Tabung Haji's balance sheet is instantly restored so they can legally continue to operate and pay out dividends.
But we really need to look at exactly how much this rescue cost the public. The real actual market value of those toxic assets was only RM 9.63 billion. But to completely fill the financial hole, UJSB essentially bought them at a massively inflated transfer value of RM 19.90 billion. That roughly 10 billion premium, that was a direct fiscal rescue absorbed by the government to protect the depositors. And hey, you might remember those viral rumors going around back then, saying this was some secret sell-off of Malay Muslim assets to non-Muslims? The RCI report conclusively debunks that. It was strictly an internal transfer from one government entity to another government entity. It was literally the only way to prevent a total systemic collapse. Okay, let's jump to Section 4, the 2026 debt settlement and those maturing obligations. Because here's the thing, when you issue nearly RM 20 billion in debt to bail out a fund, the bill eventually comes due. Fast forward to May 29, 2026, when the first RM 12.5 billion chunk of that zero-coupon bailout debt finally reaches maturity. Obviously, dropping RM 12.5 billion in pure cash would completely drain the federal budget. So the government used a really smart hybrid package to settle it. The vast majority of it, RM 11.5 billion, was refinanced through a brand new 10-year sukuk. But to settle the remaining RM 965 million, instead of using cash, the government transferred physical real estate straight back to Tabung Haji. And the physical assets they returned are highly strategic. Tabung Haji got back nearly 9,000 hectares of estate land in Sarawak. But the real crown jewel here is 1.568 acres of prime commercial land right in the Tun Razak Exchange, or TRX, over in KL. The history of this specific plot of land is pretty wild law. Tabung Haji originally bought this TRX land back in 2015 from 1MDB in a highly controversial deal. It was then transferred away during that 2018 bailout, so getting it back in 2026 finally gives Tabung Haji a piece of prime real estate with massive development potential, which can generate real, sustainable profits moving forward.
Which perfectly leads us into Section 5, securing the fund's future and the 25 key reforms. But quickly, before we cover how they are fixing this permanently, I want to say thanks for watching. Join thousands of Malaysians who want clarity, not confusion. Tap that like button, hit subscribe, and let's keep making sense of all this together. All right, so fixing the math isn't going to be enough if the machine itself is still broken, right? That's why the RCI proposed 25 core structural reforms to the Tabung Haji Act 1995. The biggest ones? First, completely bar active politicians from holding board seats. Second, enforce strict fit and proper requirements so that board members actually have documented financial or legal expertise before they can make billion ringgit decisions. Third, separate the ministerial duties. Let the Minister of Religious Affairs handle the pilgrims, while the Minister of Finance oversees the actual investments. And finally, place the new Hajj fund under the strict regulatory oversight of the Securities Commission. The really good news here is that the Cabinet has noted that Kuwait management has already successfully implemented about 75% of these much-needed safeguards. There is a quote from Transparency International Malaysia that I think perfectly sums up the big lesson here. They said, "Genuine confidence is built through competent governance, timely disclosure, independent oversight, effective enforcement, and transparent corrective action, not prolonged secrecy. Protecting the absolute trust of 9.7 million depositors requires total transparency. Hiding financial realities, relying on creative accounting, or delaying bad news only ever makes the eventual crash that much worse." Right now, the Attorney General's chambers and the MACC are actively reviewing the RCI findings to see if any criminal prosecutions are warranted regarding those 14 troubled investments, because at the end of the day, accountability simply has to be part of the healing process.
Look, the 2018 rescue mission absolutely saved the fund from collapse, and the 2026 debt settlement shows that the recovery process is maturing steadily. There is no doubt that Tabung Haji is in a much safer position today than it was a few years ago. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, crucial question. While these new structural reforms look fantastic on paper, will they really be enough to permanently protect our national institutions and your hard-earned savings from political interference in the decades to come? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for joining me on Malaysia in Focus, and I'll see you in the next explainer.